Welcome in. We are on insight number 4. Insight number 4, leaders are future shapers. Ayana, we tried to have fun with the tagline here. I'm going to try to read it out. Ready?
I'm ready.
Don't stop at simply inheriting systems. Lean in to shape the future you want to leave for others. Wow.
Yeah. Sounds like we are descendants of the infamous Muhammad Gandhi, that we understand truly that to be agents of the future, we've got to design for tomorrow's today. We believe that strongly. Yeah. Um, it's good to be back. We're talking about future ready leadership. We're talking about what it takes to be a future ready leader for 2026 and beyond. We know that this happens in a really complex world. And yes, Megan, we're on insight number 4. It's been great hearing from and getting engagement from those who listened to the first few insights and are with us in the conversation. So maybe to open with just a word of welcome to all the listeners and viewers who are in this with us and who really care about what it means to position your leadership as a profession, as a vocation, as an art and a craft, as a joy that you get to do your leadership on behalf of the organizations and communities that you serve. And we get to be a part of that. Today's topic, man, future shaping, it's at the heart of who we are as systems thinkers. If I set the context for us, we firmly know and see in our daily work that leaders are dually related to the future in many ways. They are ones who design for the future around the corner, and they're ones who are reading the signals of the future that's already breaking in. Both are happening simultaneously. And in some ways, that's what makes the present moment so dynamic, right? Getting ready for what is and responsive to what is emerging, like in the moment, breaking in. We need only look at the speed and pace of tech to see some of that. Or we look on the people side in terms of how employees and employee-employer relationships are constantly flexing. We look at the dynamic of economics and how the market we're both responding to, and by how we respond, it's shaping what happens in the moment. So yeah, the future, us being leaders who are shaping and dynamically a part of the future, seems to be a relevant hot topic in lots of ways. Yeah. Okay. So I know we like to start these conversations, as you just framed it so beautifully, sometimes with a quote as well. And one of the things I often go back to is just a simple few word phrase that the author Virginia Woolf wrote a while back, when she simply stated, like, the future is dark. And there's something just about like naming that in the humility of being leaders, we are reading the signals, but there's also just this humility that it's unknown.
Mm-hmm.
It is unknown. And we show a lot of bravery and courage when we step into it. Yeah. So I think my opening comment is that to be a leader who is brave enough to be a future shaper, I just want to celebrate those leaders who every day step into the unknown, the darkness, and who want to bring their own expression of light and possibility into that. That's my opening. So like start there.
Beautiful. Okay, let me pull on some threads.
Yeah.
Both questions, statements, comments. When the future is dark,
Yeah.
you can't quite see what might happen. Ayana, what would we encourage leaders to practice themselves? What do they need to be thinking about practicing? As we've encouraged them to be spending time in their own leadership practices, specifically around this, what's really asked of them, what's really called upon, leaning into that space.
Leaning into the future. Yeah. In many ways, I think of this as like a core part of what it is to be human, to start with. I was listening to a Harvard professor a few days ago. I'm remiss to not remember the name. but he was citing a research study, neuroscientist studying a research study, and people were heading into an MRI, and they were, mapping the brain. And the opening question was like, think about nothing. Because they really wanted to get people's default state. Like, where does the brain go like its default state? And unfortunately, I don't have a paper to cite or anything. But what this gentleman said was the majority of people, pick your number, what majority means, actually were in a default state of thinking about the future. Yeah. To be prospective is a part of what it is to be human. You're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner, thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow, thinking about, the meeting that you need to have stand up, thinking about how you're going to get home after you leave the MRI, like whatever that is, that we're actually oriented to be thinking about the future. So I love your question about practices, because I think the first thing to remember is that it's already intrinsic in us to have this propensity to want to be thinking about, seeing, feeling around the corner. Yeah. Around the corner into the future. And so practices, let's not be afraid, don't have to feel like additive, but really just explorative of how we've come into the world in lots of ways. Yeah. Um, you and I, as people who get to work with leaders, see their practices in action around this. And I'll toss it back to you, but the first practice that I see is people's intentionality about being curious,
Mhm.
about being curious. The more that we can ask better questions, look into areas where we haven't probed before, it's very adjacent to what it takes to see into the future, into the dark, into the unknown, curious about something that we haven't yet experienced, a knowledge set that we haven't yet known. You can't see it, but I'm looking at a beautiful blooming orchid. 5 years ago, someone gave me an orchid. The flowers fell off. I thought it died. And then I went on my own little curious path of trying to figure out what is it about these plants that can make them bloom. And now I have probably 15 that are constantly their own cycle of blooming. And so I, I took an unknown space, right? In many ways, through going into a place that was dark and unknown to me through curiosity, have created a future that has orchids in my life. Kind of lovely. So I would just say like, the first practice is nurture one's curiosity. Step into places that may feel unknown to you, because that actually is where the future resides.
Mhm.
Where the future resides. Okay, toss the ball over to you. A
Mhm.
practice that we see leaders using in order to grow their own sense of future seeing capability.
I think another key practice is the world of prototyping and experiments. When the future is dark, when you can't quite see around the corner, doing something big, starting an orchid farm.
Maybe not that big. I love it.
I'm trying to keep it going. Feels too big. Feels like, ooh, that's full of risk. I
Mm,
can't quite see how I might plant the orchids, farm the orchids, whatever it might be. And so the ability to take one small step, one experiment, one way of trying on testing is a great way to gain confidence, to gain quick feedback loops, to gain experience with what the future might have entail or not. And so I think that's a really important um, practice that one can individually do, as well as one can do with their team in order to encourage others to be able to come with you as you're experimenting, as you're prototyping.
yeah. I love that you introduced the notion of risk. It's so, I mean, it's necessary to talk about in the world of future making, future shaping. Because next
It
to
is.
the dark, the unknown, I mean, these are all the ingredients that make us tentative, if not fearful, right? About trying something different and moving into the land of risk. The other thing is, you said so lovely, prototyping and what your hands did there, small pieces. We work with leaders, and sometimes we even see the aha when when we invite them to creatively tinker with their standard meeting. You know, that Tuesday morning huddle that happens all the same way all the time, or that Thursday 3 o'clock, right? Strategy session, etc. The little pieces of how might you intentionally just tweak something. And it's so adjacent to the reflection muscles that we've talked about on other podcasts. The reflection muscles of considering what did we try and what did we learn, the learning mindset, right? That I'm willing to, if I am learning as a future oriented, future ready leader, I want to shape tomorrow differently. You got to ask yourself the question of what do I want to keep? What might I let go of? And what might I shift? We see this all the time. What do you want to start, stop, keep? Um, and it is a part of a practice, I think, of being a future oriented, future shaping leader. And again, incrementally, it doesn't have to be big, big, big. It can be
Mm-hmm.
small, small.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
think the smaller the size of it, what you want to have nested with that is the intentionality of like trying a thing. And even if it comes by accident, you didn't realize you did something different, reflect on it, right? That was an opportunity. You stepped into something that caused a shift. So I think that's really like,
Yeah. And I think the other piece as well around framing the notion of experiments, prototypes, is that it gives permission to yourself because it's so much pressure,
mm-hmm,
right? The leader, it's so much pressure to be able to see into the future, to be able to see through darkness or create light. And oftentimes you don't have the answer yourself. And so you're needing to frame a way or frame a process or frame the journey around both how to see into it, to
mm-hmm,
pull it forward and to execute on it. And so I find when we can help our clients and personally in our business, when we can frame it as how might we experiment? How might we try something on? Let's move something, here, here, and here. All of a sudden, it just gives permission to the leader and their team to not have it, have to be perfect, not have it have to all work out, not have it, have to land exactly what you thought it was going to be out of the get go. It's the permission to try it on.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's also about, and we use this phrase often, about taking the work or the opportunity seriously, but taking yourself lightly. And so some people are actual heart surgeons and saving lives,
Sure.
and others
Yes.
have this roominess of experimenting in a meeting, or shifting our project plan deadlines, that we can add some. And I don't mean playfulness in any sort of pejorative term, like we're not taking it seriously, but there is a delight in the experimentation, in the culture of innovation that is required, right? In order to, again, step into the possibility of being a co-designer and shaper. Yeah, I'm sure that we're in. We see the leaders who act in this way being celebrated. Yeah, they're recognized by, again, not accolades. You're not going for the gold star, but they're recognized by their teams as being leaders who are like come with postures, right? Come with. Let's try to do a thing, and we get to experiment often by tapping into the skills, gifts, charisms, if you will, ways of working, wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, and more. Yeah, that can all be pulled forward. So that too. What I do want to talk a little bit about in space of future shaping, seeing around the corner, is the capability, the joyfulness, the opportunity, is the world of imagination. And again, you and I over 10 years have seen the worst of siloing when organizations are so, and people come with a mindset, right? That it's got to be a certain way and there's no room for creativity or imagination. There's only problem solving, there's only critical thinking. And, we know that it's about creative thinking adjacent to strategic and critical thinking. It's things like design thinking that come alongside. We also know that imagination and creativity are well springs out of which the future, unknown yet, can emerge, right? Um, those leaders who are working in really product oriented environments know about this space in a dynamic way. But other leaders in other contexts, um, if anyone's listening out there, like the reminder is to access your imagination and your creativity as part of your toolkit and practice set, um, that you can bring to your leadership. It all accents the muscles required for what we're talking about. Reading the signals of the future, stepping into it, incremental shifts. What might I try? All that's imagination and creativity as well. You know, uh, maybe you are planting orchids, but maybe you do something. Maybe you have your ways of accessing that. I know lots of folks who are really clear that their best creative thinking happens at the start of their day. They get up, the neuroscience says don't have your coffee too early, have your coffee 2 hours or so after you get up. So you get up, you might exercise, you might do some meditation, reflection, you might read something that is not the news, but like activates another part of your senses and awareness of how the world operates. Yeah, you might do things that, I love to cook, and it's a way of processing and releasing some of that creative energy. What can I do in 20 minutes with 5 ingredients? So everyone has their ways. And yeah, I think the encouragement is to lean into those ways, and know that it's all a part of the leadership story that you're writing for yourself.
Yeah, it's pretty magical when I'm reminded of, the current team I was just with today.
Mm-hmm.
And, this has been a couple year journey to design a different way of operating, design a more agile, experimental, innovative way of operating. And this team has had to, you know, believe that that could happen and remember some of these core skills, to your point on what it means to be human, and to remember that imagination, hope, will, agency, it's all in them. And oftentimes, when something's been going the same way for years on years and you feel like you don't have agency to change the system, you can really lose inspiration. You can lose a sense of desire. And helping a team, helping individuals remember that this is in them, this is core to who you are, is beautiful as that starts to grow momentum as part of experimentation, as part of changing process, as part of, leading in a different way, is to have them remember that, imagination, hope, design, creativity, we all have it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really powerful. Yeah, I mean, no one ever said this leading thing was easy.
Mm-mm.
So we want to step into the future. You're talking about the simultaneous work of unlocking humans.
Yeah,
You're also talking about the work of facilitating change.
just that.
Just those simple things. Um, because oftentimes this is a process of unlearning cultures that we inherit, yeah, which leads to that kind of outcomes of the future. And so, yeah, strategic change, unlocking humans, bringing people along, inspiring along the way. And I mean, let's not forget the big bucket also of designing the work so it has roominess to have this space to do this kind of things. The language for that is, execution practices. How do we get the work done in a way that actually allows for the thinking, the creativity, and the doing, the experimentation, prototyping, in the same way. So yeah, highly complex, lots of interdependencies in the midst of all of that.
Mhm. I am curious, Ayana, around, I've almost got sort of a stacked image in my head. You know, a leader a leader is stepping in. They access these practices. They're beginning to get their teams to experiment. Almost feels like sort of level one, so to speak, ring one. Yeah, they're starting to really see, right, both the competency and the capability that can be turned on as teams are experimenting, all that you've said, activating humans. And now, almost at the new level, organizations, teams, families, they're starting to move a bit faster. Mhm. And so, what's the next level from your perspective on being able to pull forward? You talked earlier about being able to read signals, being able to, pull forward new insights from the darkness. What's the kind of next step that you see once you've been able to be courageous, research, turn experimentation on? What happens next?
Yeah, I love it. Um, I think a few things can
Mm,
happen for
yep.
sure. I think the foundation that you're talking about is both foundational but a catalyst for some of this culture change around a posture toward learning. And when we start learning, we can't unsee the pathway and the joy of learning. Does that make sense? So you turn it on. And so I think there's an acceleration that happens in the aptitude and the desire for accelerated. We do this with our hands a lot, like cycles, flywheels, yeah, um, of learning, of debriefing, of we talk a lot about like measuring variability. What did we try to do? What did we actually achieve? What was the delta between the two? I think that's really important. And then I think the next step, compounding that, is when you are learning in that way, your radar in terms of like what you need to be paying attention to also starts to shift.
Say more.
What are the key indicators that actually inform our decision making? Were we paying attention to the right kind of data points, the right kind of risks, the right kind of competencies and capabilities? Because as we're learning, we're also figuring out what's working. And so what we're paying attention to rightly, I think, starts to modify. Yeah. And we get more of what we pay attention to. So as we're maturing, if I read your stepping, yeah, as we're
Yep.
maturing in our ableness around being more future oriented and capable, the signals and the debunking of the assumptions of what we should be paying attention to also starts to shift because we're learning this is working, signal, more attention, yeah. And it may not be where we thought we should have been, 5 days ago, 5 years ago, where we should have been paying attention. It's somewhere.
Yeah, a common term, Steve Jobs, somebody said this,
Yeah.
signal versus noise.
Yeah.
And how do you really, as a leader, ensure you're paying attention and allowing the time and the space to be able to decipher and discern that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so inextricably tied, therefore, to, I almost said like getting it right, but like, moving toward what you really want. You want to move toward the signal, right? You don't want to move in the fuzziness of the noise. You want to move toward the signal, and that generates momentum, accuracy, velocity, right? Um, and depending on the kind of work that you're about, hopefully also impact. Hopefully you're changing lives, changing communities, changing what is you intend to change for a better tomorrow, right? Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, I love that
Mhm.
signal and noise thing. And maybe some might ask, well, how do I get better at that? And this is where I don't think there's a formula. It's definitely not an algorithm. But I do think that this is where leadership is exemplified as a social process. And the way we get better at differentiating between the signal and the noise is in the, what you just said, like the coming together, like to talk about it. Like, what is it? You call it discernment. Like, what is it? Is it noise? Is it signal? Is it something else? And what are we going to try and respond to our best guess about that? We've listed collective wisdom of the team, leader and team, wherever you are, right? I'm doing this with my organizational hierarchy with my hands. Wherever you are, listening in a compounded way and truly talking about it, truly talking about it. Because I do think it's a collective sifting and sorting social process about where we then will choose to put our attention and choose to experiment, choose to try on so that we can learn and then try again.
Mhm. And I think as a leader and as a team and as, call it, norms that you want to put in place as you're getting to, my hands do this in terms of scaling this or maturing this, whatever the more helpful language is. I think you also have to have that time and the bravery that in moments you have to be able to slow down, right? Call a timeout and say, we, based on what's happening, we may be actually pointing in the wrong direction. And to your point, we need to be able to go, we were going right, we need to go left, or we need to course correct in a particular way. And ensure that the team is with you in that process, to your point on like being able to surface it, being able to discuss it, and um, to not have too much ego associated with any of that, right? The ego in the process, the ego or the rigor of the process, the rigor of the conversation being more important than the particular outcome or the particular, choice that you're making. Because when you're truly in this dark space, you don't have all the answers. Which I think is like an interesting conversation that we get into with our clients on incentive structure.
Okay, take me there.
I think it's just such a complex space. I have deep empathy for the complexity of incentive structures. Right? You want to be able to incent the performance, incent the outcome, whatever those might be. And yet you may need to change directions, particularly, as we have said, in this nonlinear world, you may need to change directions multiple times. It may cause a delay. It may cause you, to have to go about it differently. And so I think the incentive structures and the conversations around that need to be able to hold both. I got to hit my revenue target. I've got to, do X number of sales calls, outcomes, whatever they might be, and allow enough flexibility that if you need to change course, that is also rewarded.
We should have a whole talk on that at some point. Yeah. And when I picture that at multiple levels, because I know we're not talking about incentivization exclusively in terms of monetary reward. And when I picture that at the levels of leadership, managers, directors going all up, kind of work that is being asked for and the accountabilities that are being asked for at each level. I'm fully aligned. There is both empathy required for that and strategic smarts. The interdependency. I'm trying to be empathetic here now, almost like listening through the ears of those who may be listening to this, and some may be hearing us say two things at the same time. Around experiment, it increases velocity, acceleration, it does that, and it's important to slow down and to create the business, right? Many of our clients, a good portion, are working in for-profit contexts where they're really trying to ensure that revenue generation is on first and these around expenses is managed thoughtfully. Megan, how do you see that? Like, how do you see it, or how do you work with it? That we actually can move fast into the future by slowing down. you know, uh, slowing down the thinking, accelerating the experimentation, right? Uh, there's a paradox in there that I don't think is a threat to those who are like, but you have to move faster because you gotta create the product, create the revenue, get the clients, You know, my profession of origin, you know, get those disciples in the pews. You know, you got to move. Say something. Just how do you wrap your head around that? How do you wrap your head around like a seeming paradox there?
Perhaps it's I have a few ways I think about this. Um, my first reaction, my first response to you was perhaps just the depth of strategic change I've been in over the years, and knowing that when you do rush, when you do chase, particular outcomes, and you haven't always thought about capturing feedback or trying something on before you roll it out or whatever it might be, inevitably, and there's so much data, you don't hit the ultimate outcome, and you cause more work after. Rework, lost time, productivity goes down because you haven't actually designed a process or a new way of working that can be adopted. So you send your system into a worse state. The tricky part is when the leader exits at that point. They have been celebrated, but the organization's left in a worse place. So lots of data, lots of perspective on why this stuff matters. So I think about it through that lens. And then, you know me, my love language of being able to tactically access, living in both speed of execution and results. Anyone that knows me knows that, like, that is my love space. We're getting stuff done. High accountability. And, the ability to slow the system down, course correct. And so my love space of meeting cadence kicks in. Meeting cadence, rhythm, so that folks understand when and how all of that paradox, that polarity can actually happen in unison. And being able to set rhythm, set cadence, use meetings as a way to help the organization move between two very opposing or paradoxical stance mindsets. I've just come to really recognize the power of that.
Do you want to give a practical example? The language of meeting cadence. Let's just unpack that for a second. We're talking about, I mean, I could talk, but go ahead.
Mhm. The meetings that you have, no, the intentional design against, usually, if I let me take it annually all the way down. Meeting cadence for me, some might call this rhythm of business. Some might call this annual planning or annual corporate calendars. Some might call this the enterprise story. And for me, it is about intentionally thinking and designing for how the organization is going to move through its year. When do we do strategy? When do we set the plan? When do we look back and set the plan going forward? Usually that has, depending on your context, review cycles necessary and board updates necessary. And then when do we commission that? When is it live? And how do we get clear that it is now ready to be, with precision, the plan, the priorities for this year? And then I think the really important part is to know that when I hold a mindset of experimentation, it also means that I can see in a more granular way, probably a quarter or 2 quarters out. And so the rhythm of being able to plan over the quarters and then touch base quarter on quarter. And how are we doing, and what worked and what didn't? In those quarterly sessions, in those looking back, looking forward, recommitting to the work, there is so much room. And the intention is that there's so much room to ask the questions of what worked, what didn't, what might we need to change or adjust? Do we need to abandon ship altogether and start fresh? And that time together, to your point of the social process, just really makes all of this come to life.
Yeah, agreed. And just to add, just because I don't think it was as explicit, what worked, what didn't work, and back to like the 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 nesting of this within a future oriented conversation. What new data is there, right? coming from external, internal, right? That supports now our collective discernment, strategic thinking, collective understanding about what the now current state is. Just made a shift. Just made a shift, right? We've stepped into the future that we didn't know 3 months ago. Now we're in it. It's now our current state, and so designing for the next horizon. Yeah, I just think it's so important for leaders to hear that, the sense that there are multiple levels of story around conversation and meeting. I might use the language like, story tables. We're telling the story as we go along. We're designing it as we go along, responding to it. And you could keep going, right? From like enterprise to the team quarterly to what does a team who's working through a strategic initiative and project, how they do that at pace. I mean, that's where the world of agile really shows up in lots of ways, right? Like what's the intensive rhythm that you need in order to do a prototype, experiment, initiative, really progress work. And the last component I would add to all of this with meeting cadence is that this is all happening with particular humans. And so in all of this rhythm and spaces of collective thinking, we are also learning about how people think within that. We're also developing people within that. So the slow down to go fast, you're also speeding up in each of those moments, more competence, more capability, more alignment and practice of how you get to alignment. So you're investing in the people, the talent, the members, right? As you do this work of slowing down to go faster and reiterating along the way. And I just think the both and of like the people system and that organizational rhythm system are just so critical because it speaks to win-win, like the compounding impact of designing it in this way. Yeah, I can see that. You thinking of a story? You thinking of a particular case?
I think that this takes this way of working takes a particular attention to development for sure and trust.
Mm-hmm.
So folks have the benefit of being able to be clear on process, be clear on meeting cadence, architectures, all the things we're talking about, is that it is, as a leader, it is a great first move to establishing trust because folks have a better understanding of how they're going to play. I know the plays I want to run, right? And I just think that is just an important part to call out as well. Because what it can feel like when you're in experiments and it's not working and things aren't happening at the speed, trust can feel fragile in those moments, right? Am I really gonna, be punished in a certain way, or can I really come forward and say this isn't working? And so I think the cadence helps really mitigate someone feeling in the dark again, and therefore, the fragility of trust being there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're emphasizing interpersonal trust in some ways, but then, and there's also just like trust the process. If you've got to trust the process, let there be a process. So creating the container to know, we said the plays that we're going to play. It's also know the play field, right? Yeah. And where we're going to play in that. Okay. Yeah. That's really good. Maybe, nearing like the last thing I think is really important to just like touch on when we think about the future. It's also back to risk, like a personal place of risk. Not everyone's comfortable with being a designer of the future. It's a sibling of the fear of change.
Yes.
Cousins, siblings, same family, same house. I think we're learning some things too about how people adapt, mature, their ease of stepping into the future, connected to an ease around, their growing ability to step into change. I just think that when we talk soon, one of our insights we're going to talk about is owning your leadership. And I think there's also personal accountability of individual leaders, team members, individuals who are in the workplace, spaces and more, to do the work of internal reconciliation, reconciling, being curious about their own relationship to change and the future. Themselves those questions, right? Because everything that we've described, in some ways, I've been holding in my mind the imagination of like everyone's all in.
Isn't this fun? We love this. Yeah.
Isn't this
Yeah.
great?
Yeah. That's how you and I get up in the morning. Yes.
I mean, what
However,
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 however, uh,
however.
yeah. So I guess I'm just saying that out loud because I think there is a personal ownership and accountability um, when you choose to put yourself in environments that require that kind of future orientation and change. As a member of a team, as a leader, future-oriented leader of the team, man, you've got to have your own clarity, like of how you want to operate those spaces, so that you can be additive constructively and not resisting out of a place that is less constructive. Constructive. We watch leaders, put together teams of people who have open heart, open mind, open will to be in the business of designing the next future. And so I just think it's really important for people to know know what kind of environment they want to put themselves in and how they are open heart, open will, open ready to step into places where change is happening at an accelerated pace and to relate to have clarity on like what's scary about that for me and what am I willing to experiment with, right? What about that might I need to name? Um, but to find a way of identifying both where there might be resistance, fear grounded resistance, and where there might be opportunity. The empathy I'm feeling is for those who these days, we're hearing a lot, oh, AI is coming in, I'm not going to have a job, it's just moving too fast, et cetera, et cetera. That sounds like all resistance. And I think we're in conversations with folks about yes, that is reasonable, and let's do some work about how you can see opportunity for yourself in this opportunity with others as well. Am I being clear? I hope I'm being clear. Like saying,
I just also think that there's a lot on the go in this moment in our world. And so, in the organizational context, being able to do that personal work to ensure that you're aware, paying attention to your own relationship with change, unknown, future orientation. And then I also just have deep empathy right now around how much that is also asking of us in our personal lives when the rules of the world seem to be being rewritten in front of us, and the unknowns about broader shifts and how they're going to impact us. I just think cumulatively in this exact moment, it's also a lot. And so these practices are great at work and they're great at home and they're great with your kids and they're great across a lot of different spaces. And I think when you're really working in this way, you can start to see it on people's faces. And so I think there's just an invitation to check in. I'll say it again, slow down, and ensure folks are either doing that work or that you're helping remind them that that is available to them.
yeah, being human in your leadership once again, right? And paying attention to the humans that are around you.
Yeah, I'm excited for our next insight. We're talking about AI, and we just see it. Like we know folks are. It's both opportunistic and just so scary. And so I just think it's a great topic to pull this conversation forward to.
Great. Megan, what's been your aha in our little chit chat? I always love talking with you.
Mm-hmm. 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 I think my takeaway is I loved your quote on the future is dark.
Mm-hmm. Virginia Woolf.
Thank you, Virginia. And to know that you can create light in that darkness through hopefully these practices today, and how that hope is all available to you.
Love that. It's great. Yeah, takeaways, impact. I am just a firm believer that the future works both ways. It it's something that we create and we're stepping into an unknown, but also that the future is breaking in and um, giving us signs, signals, indicators of what it is becoming. And so I just want us to say to pay such attention to the criticality of reading the signals now, where there are signals that are for human dignity, let's go there. Where there are signals for compassion and equity, let's go there. Where there are signals of human sensibility, collective consciousness, kindness, radical justice, let's go there. And let's design the worlds that create the spaces where those futures can flourish. Individually, as leaders of community, of teams, of organizations, of congregations, of synagogues, of government, let's do the things that think beyond ourselves for the sake and with others, for a world that has room for all. So important. Okay, leadership for the future is here and now.
Mhm.
We're so thankful to have a conversation with each other and to have this private public space, you and I chatting, but a public conversation in many ways. Um, STRAAD is our contribution to building a future for tomorrow. We get to work with leaders in executive coaching, in advisory spaces. We work with families and enterprise. We work with not-for-profit spaces as well as the corporate space. And our work works at the nexus of turning on the leaders and the systems that they're in so that they can lead change congruent to their values, principles, and an ambition of the tomorrow that they want to build. We love hearing from any and all who are listening or find their way to this conversation, and we'd welcome a conversation with you.